The mansion stood on the most expensive street in the city, surrounded by tall iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges that seemed to stretch endlessly along the sidewalk. Anyone passing by could immediately tell that this place belonged to someone powerful. The marble driveway curved toward a towering entrance framed by white pillars, and the windows reflected the sunlight like polished mirrors. People in the neighborhood often slowed their cars just to glance at the property. It was the home of a well-known billionaire, a man whose name appeared regularly in business magazines and news headlines. His companies reached across industries. His wealth seemed almost endless, and his lifestyle was the kind that most people only ever saw in movies. For years, the mansion had been known simply as the billionaire's residence, a quiet symbol of luxury and success. The staff inside the house kept everything running smoothly. Housekeepers cleaned the halls before sunrise, gardeners shaped the lawns with precision, and cooks prepared meals that could rival those served in five-star restaurants. Everything moved like a perfectly organized system. But that calm reputation began to change the day the billionaire introduced his new wife to the public. She arrived suddenly and brought with her an air that was impossible to ignore. Tall, sharply dressed, and always carrying herself with strict confidence, she quickly made it clear that she expected absolute perfection from everyone around her. At first, people outside the mansion only noticed small details. Neighbors saw new security cameras being installed along the walls. Delivery drivers whispered that they were now required to follow complicated instructions just to enter the property. Inside the house, the staff began to feel the change immediately. The new wife believed the mansion should run according to her personal standards, and those standards were far stricter than anything the workers had experienced before. Every surface had to shine, every item had to sit at a precise angle, and every task had to be completed exactly the way she demanded. Even the smallest mistake could turn into a long lecture. A glass placed slightly off-center on the dining table could lead to a sharp reprimand. A curtain left half an inch open could bring a cold stare that made the entire room feel tense. Soon the mansion that once felt organized and professional began to feel intimidating. Workers who had served the billionaire for years found themselves nervous whenever she walked into a room. The new wife also introduced a long list of rules. Staff members were told exactly when they could speak and when they had to remain silent. They were given strict schedules that left almost no room for rest. She inspected the house constantly, appearing without warning to check corners, shelves, and floors for dust that no one else could even see. If something was not perfect, she made sure everyone knew it. Her voice carried through the long hallways as she pointed out every flaw. Within weeks, the atmosphere inside the mansion grew heavy. The workers who once felt proud to be employed in such a prestigious home now dreaded the start of their shifts. Some of them quietly searched for other jobs. Others tried to adjust, hoping the situation would improve. But the reputation of the house began to spread beyond the gates. Agencies that supplied household staff started hearing the same reports again and again. Maids who were hired would leave quickly, often exhausted by the constant pressure. Word traveled through service circles in the city. People warned each other about the mansion on the expensive street and the billionaire's demanding new wife. It became a place known not for its beauty, but for the difficulty of working inside it. What had once been considered a dream job slowly turned into a position that many workers refused to accept. Still, the house remained spotless and impressive from the outside, giving no hint of the tension that filled its hallways every day. To the public, it was simply another symbol of extreme wealth, a home where luxury seemed endless and every detail looked perfect. But behind those tall iron gates and polished marble floors, the staff moved carefully, knowing that at any moment the billionaire's new wife might appear to inspect their work with eyes that missed nothing. At first, the changes inside the mansion seemed like temporary adjustments. The staff believed the new wife was simply trying to settle into her new home and establish her routines. But as the weeks passed, the tension only grew stronger. The household that once ran smoothly now felt like a place where every worker walked on eggshells. The maids felt the pressure the most. They were responsible for the daily care of the mansion, from polishing the marble floors to dusting the long shelves filled with expensive decorations. Every morning they arrived hoping to complete their duties without attracting attention, yet it rarely worked that way. The billionaire's new wife inspected everything with a level of scrutiny that shocked even the most experienced workers. One maid lasted only 3 days before quietly asking the house manager to release her from the job. She had years of experience cleaning luxury homes, but she said she had never faced expectations like these. Another maid stayed a week, trying her best to keep up with the endless list of corrections. The new wife pointed out every tiny detail, sometimes calling the maid back into a room just to move an object a few centimeters to the left. The smallest mistake felt like a failure that could not be forgiven. Soon the pattern became obvious. A new maid would arrive, hopeful and determined, carrying cleaning supplies and wearing the polite smile expected in such a grand household. For the first few hours, things would seem manageable. Then the inspections would begin. The new wife moved through the mansion like a strict supervisor, running her finger along shelves to check for dust and examining the floors from different angles to see if they truly shined. If she found something that didn't meet her standard, she didn't hide her disappointment. Her voice was calm but sharp, and the silence that followed her criticism made the maids feel smaller with every word. Some tried to work faster, believing speed would solve the problem. Others slowed down, hoping extra care would prevent mistakes. Neither approach seemed to satisfy her. The job became exhausting in ways that had nothing to do with physical labor. The constant pressure made it difficult to think clearly, and even experienced workers started making small errors simply because they were nervous. Within a month, the mansion had already seen several maids come and go. The house manager tried to keep the system running by calling employment agencies across the city. New workers arrived almost every week, but the outcome rarely changed. One maid lasted 2 weeks before breaking down in tears during an inspection in the living room. Another quit after being asked to redo the same hallway 3 times in a single afternoon. Each departure added another story to the growing reputation of the house. The agencies began warning applicants that the position might be difficult. Some workers refused the offer immediately when they heard the address. Others accepted out of curiosity or because the pay was higher than most cleaning jobs in the city. But once they stepped inside the mansion and experienced the strict environment, many realized why the job had become so infamous. The other staff members watched this cycle repeat itself again and again. The cooks and gardeners tried to stay out of the conflict, focusing on their own responsibilities, but they couldn't ignore the constant changes in the cleaning staff. The maids' uniforms seemed to change every week as new faces appeared in the hallways. Conversations in the staff break room became quiet and cautious, with workers exchanging concerned looks whenever they heard footsteps approaching. Outside the mansion, the rumors continued to spread. Drivers, delivery workers, and service employees who visited the property shared their observations with others. The story of the mansion where no maid could last slowly turned into a topic people discussed with disbelief. Some said the new wife demanded perfection that no human could achieve. Others believed the job was cursed by impossible expectations. Whatever the reason, the result remained the same. The mansion kept hiring maids, and the maids kept leaving, sometimes within days of starting the job. The revolving door of workers became so common that even the security guards at the front gate started recognizing the pattern. A new maid would arrive with hopeful energy, sign in at the gate, and walk up the long driveway toward the towering entrance. Days later, that same maid would walk back out carrying her bag, her expression tired and disappointed, leaving behind another empty position that would soon be filled by someone else willing to try their luck inside the billionaire's demanding household. By the time another opening appeared for a maid at the mansion, most employment agencies in the city already knew the story. The address alone was enough to make many workers hesitate. Some refused the job immediately, shaking their heads before the details were even explained. Others listened for a moment and then politely declined, saying they preferred a quieter household. The agencies continued searching, but it was becoming harder to find someone willing to step through those tall iron gates and faced the reputation of the billionaire's demanding new wife. Then one morning, a woman walked into a small staffing office on the edge of the city. She was dressed simply, carrying a worn handbag and a calm expression that didn't reveal much about what she was thinking. Her name was Naomi, and she had years of experience working in homes that required patience and discipline. The manager at the agency studied her file carefully. Naomi had worked in hotels, private houses, and even a large estate outside the city. Her references described her as quiet, dependable, and extremely careful with her work. When the manager mentioned the mansion job, he hesitated for a moment before explaining its reputation. He told her that many maids had already tried and left quickly. He described the strict rules and the intense inspections carried out by the new wife. Most applicants reacted with surprise or concern when they heard those details, but Naomi simply listened without interrupting. When the explanation ended, she nodded slowly as if she had expected something challenging. She asked a few simple questions about the schedule and the responsibilities, then said she was willing to take the job. The manager looked at her again, slightly puzzled by her calm response. He reminded her that others had quit within days, but Naomi repeated that she understood and would still like the opportunity. Within a day, the agency arranged for her to report to the mansion. On the morning of her first shift, Naomi arrived at the large iron gate that guarded the entrance. The security guard checked her name against the list and allowed her to enter. She walked along the curved marble driveway, her footsteps quiet against the polished surface. The mansion looked even larger up close, its tall pillars and shining windows reflecting the early sunlight. For a moment, she paused near the entrance, taking in the size of the place before stepping inside. The house manager greeted her in the main hall and gave a brief tour of the areas she would be responsible for cleaning. The floors stretched out in wide, polished patterns, and the rooms were filled with expensive furniture that required careful handling. Naomi listened closely as the manager explained the daily routine and the specific expectations set by the billionaire's wife. It was clear that every corner of the house had to be maintained at the highest level. The manager also warned her quietly that the new wife inspected everything herself. Naomi simply nodded again, absorbing the information without showing nervousness. As the morning continued, Naomi began her work. She moved through the halls with steady, deliberate steps, paying attention to each detail. Unlike some of the previous maids who had rushed to finish quickly, she worked at a calm, consistent pace. She dusted the long shelves carefully, wiped the glass surfaces until they reflected the light, and polished the marble floor with patience. Other staff members noticed her almost immediately. The cooks in the kitchen watched as she passed by with her cleaning supplies, wondering how long she might last. The gardeners who came inside briefly to deliver fresh flowers glanced at her with curiosity. They had seen many new maids arrive with confidence before quickly disappearing from the staff list. Naomi continued her work quietly, rarely speaking unless someone addressed her directly. She seemed focused on understanding the rhythm of the house rather than reacting to the tension around her. In the afternoon, the moment everyone expected finally arrived. The billionaire's new wife stepped into the hallway to begin one of her routine inspections. Her sharp eyes moved across the room, studying every surface as she walked. When she noticed Naomi working near the staircase, she stopped for a moment, clearly recognizing that this was a new face among the staff. The room grew silent as the other workers nearby pretended to focus on their tasks while secretly watching the interaction. Naomi straightened slightly and greeted the woman politely, her voice calm and respectful. The new wife looked at her with the same serious expression she had shown to every maid before, her gaze steady as if measuring the person standing in front of her. The inspection began the same way it always did, with careful attention to the smallest details in the room, the quiet tension settling over the hallway. As Naomi waited while the billionaire's wife slowly examined the work around her from the first day of inspections, Naomi noticed something that the other maids had struggled with. The billionaire's new wife wasn't simply looking for clean surfaces. She was looking for control, for proof that her instructions had been followed exactly. Every correction she gave carried a tone that expected immediate obedience. Many of the maids before Naomi had reacted with visible frustration or nervousness, and those reactions often made the situation worse. Naomi chose a different approach. When the new wife pointed out a detail that wasn't perfect, Naomi didn't argue or defend herself. She listened carefully, nodded once, and quietly corrected the issue without showing irritation. Her calm reaction often seemed to slow the tension in the room. The first inspection lasted longer than usual. The new wife walked through the living room, the staircase hall, and the long corridor that led to the guest bedrooms. She checked the edges of tables, the corners of rugs, and the shine of the glass cabinets. Naomi followed behind her with a cloth in hand, ready to fix anything that needed adjustment. When the woman ran her finger along the top of a shelf and paused, Naomi waited for the comment without lowering her gaze. The wife pointed to a faint mark that was barely visible in the light. Instead of rushing nervously, Naomi stepped forward, wiped the surface carefully, and thanked her for pointing it out. The reaction seemed to surprise the woman slightly. Most maids either apologized repeatedly or tried to explain themselves. Naomi simply corrected the issue and continued her work. Over the next few days, the same pattern continued. The billionaire's wife maintained her strict inspections, moving through the house with her usual precision. Naomi kept responding with the same steady attitude. She didn't hurry when given instructions, but she didn't delay either. She focused on understanding exactly what the woman expected. When a vase needed to be centered on a table, Naomi memorized the position. When the wife requested that certain windows be polished at a specific time of day so the sunlight would reflect perfectly through the glass, Naomi adjusted her schedule to match that request. Other staff members began to notice the difference. In the kitchen, the cooks quietly discussed how the new maid handled the pressure. She never raised her voice, never rolled her eyes, and never showed signs of panic during inspections. The gardeners who came inside occasionally saw her working calmly in the hallways, even when the billionaire's wife stood nearby observing every movement. What surprised them most was that Naomi seemed to pay attention to details before being told. She often adjusted objects on a shelf or wiped a surface twice, as if she already knew what the inspection would focus on. One afternoon, the wife entered the dining room while Naomi was polishing the long wooden table. The room was silent except for the soft sound of the cloth moving across the surface. The woman stopped near the doorway and watched for a moment without speaking. Naomi finished the section she was cleaning before turning to acknowledge her. The wife stepped closer and examined the table carefully. Her eyes followed the polished lines across the wood. After a moment, she pointed to a chair that was slightly angled away from the table. Naomi adjusted it immediately and stepped back into place. The inspection continued without raised voices or long lectures. For the first time in weeks, the staff noticed that the new wife moved through an entire room without repeating instructions more than once. Naomi's calm behavior slowly began to influence the atmosphere around her. Instead of rushing anxiously through her tasks, she maintained the same careful pace from morning until evening. She organized her cleaning supplies neatly and returned them to the same place after every task. When another worker asked a question, she answered quietly and returned to her work without unnecessary conversation. Her presence created a sense of quiet focus that the mansion had not felt in a long time. The billionaire's wife continued watching closely. Her expectations did not become easier, and her inspections remained detailed. Yet Naomi treated every comment the same way she had on the first day, with patience and attention rather than resistance. As the days passed, the routine of the mansion began to shift slightly. The other staff members realized that the new maid had found a way to move through the house without triggering the constant conflicts that had driven so many others away. Her calm attitude steady even when the billionaire's wife stood only a few steps away studying every movement with the same watchful eyes. Weeks passed, and the quiet rhythm Naomi had created inside the mansion continued to hold. The staff noticed something unusual that none of them had seen in months. The cleaning position was no longer changing every few days. Naomi kept showing up each morning at the same time, moving through the halls with the same steady focus she had shown on her first day. The billionaire's new wife still inspected every room with sharp attention, but the tension that once filled the house had shifted slightly. The corrections were still there, the rules still strict, yet the constant confrontations had grown less frequent. One afternoon, something unexpected happened during one of the regular inspections. The billionaire's wife entered the upstairs hallway earlier than usual. Naomi was already there, cleaning the long glass railing that overlooked the entrance hall. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, reflecting across the polished surfaces and making every detail easy to see. The wife paused a few steps behind Naomi and began watching the work without announcing her presence. Naomi continued wiping the glass slowly, her movements careful and precise. When she finished one section, she stepped back slightly to check the reflection of the light across the surface, making sure no streaks remained. The wife stepped forward and ran her finger along the railing, expecting to find the same tiny imperfections she often discovered in other areas of the house. Her finger slid across the glass without leaving a mark. She tried again a few inches away, then again near the edge of the railing. The surface remained perfectly clean. Naomi turned calmly and greeted her, holding the cloth neatly in her hand. The wife's expression stayed serious, but she moved on to inspect the rest of the hallway. She checked the frames of the paintings, the edges of the decorative tables, and the corners of the floor where dust sometimes gathered. Each time she paused, Naomi quietly stepped forward to adjust or polish anything that needed attention, often before the woman even spoke. The inspection moved into the large sitting room at the end of the hall. This room had caused problems for many maids before. The furniture was arranged with exact precision, and the wife often demanded that every chair and cushion remain perfectly aligned. As she walked across the room, she studied the arrangement carefully. Naomi had already adjusted the cushions earlier that afternoon, making sure each one matched the angle she had seen the wife prefer during previous inspections. The woman circled the room slowly, pausing near a small side table. On top of it stood a delicate crystal decoration that reflected the sunlight in small flashes across the walls. The wife leaned slightly closer, examining the object as if searching for a reason to correct something. Naomi watched quietly, waiting without tension. After a long moment, the wife reached out and turned the crystal slightly to the left. Naomi observed the exact angle of the adjustment. When the inspection moved forward, she stepped over and memorized the position without being told. The moment that surprised everyone happened a few minutes later. As the wife approached the doorway, she paused again and looked back across the room. Her eyes moved slowly over the polished furniture and the spotless floor. For the first time since she had taken control of the mansion's household rules, she didn't immediately point out a flaw. The room remained silent. Naomi stood near the table with the same calm posture she always carried during inspections. The wife's gaze rested on her for a brief second before shifting back across the room. Downstairs, two of the cooks had paused their conversation, listening carefully for the familiar sound of criticism echoing through the hallway above them. The gardeners outside the window could see the figures moving through the room, but couldn't hear the conversation. The moment stretched longer than anyone expected. The wife turned back toward the door again, her expression thoughtful as she walked out of the room, leaving Naomi standing beside the perfectly arranged furniture and the crystal decoration still catching the sunlight across the quiet walls. After that afternoon, the atmosphere inside the mansion began to change in small but noticeable ways. The routines remained strict, and the billionaire's new wife still expected every detail to meet her standards. Yet the constant tension that once filled the hallways slowly began to soften. Naomi continued working the same way she always had, moving through the rooms with steady patience and careful attention. She didn't act differently after the inspection that had surprised the staff. She still arrived early, organized her supplies, and followed the schedule she had quietly built around the house's routines. The other workers watched this with growing curiosity. Many of them had worked in the mansion long enough to remember how stressful the environment had been when the maids kept leaving. Back then, every day seemed to bring another confrontation or frustrated conversation. Now the hallways were quieter. Naomi's presence seemed to carry a steady calm, that others began to notice more clearly. In the kitchen, the cooks sometimes saw the billionaire's wife pass through without raising her voice. She still observed everything carefully, but the long lectures about tiny imperfections had become less common. The gardeners, who occasionally stepped inside to arrange flowers in the large vases throughout the house, noticed that inspections now moved faster. Instead of stopping in every corner to search for mistakes, the wife often looked around briefly before continuing to the next room. Naomi continued responding to every instruction the same way she had from the beginning. If the wife suggested a different arrangement for a table or asked for the windows to be polished again, Naomi accepted the request without showing frustration. She listened closely, memorized the preference, and quietly adjusted her work so the same correction would not be needed again. Over time, this careful attention began to reduce the number of instructions given during inspections. Many details had already been prepared exactly the way the wife expected before she even entered the room. The other staff members began learning from Naomi's example. The cooks paid closer attention to how dishes were presented on the dining table. The gardeners started arranging flowers in the precise positions they noticed the wife preferred. Naomi never told them what to do directly, but her calm method of observing and adapting quietly influenced the way the household operated. Instead of reacting with frustration when corrections were made, the staff started viewing those comments as clues to what the wife wanted to see. The mansion gradually felt more organized, not just in appearance, but in the way people moved through their responsibilities. The billionaire himself remained mostly occupied with his business affairs, often traveling or spending long hours in his private office. When he did walk through the house, he occasionally paused to look around at the polished floors and perfectly arranged rooms. The staff noticed that he seemed satisfied with the quiet order that had returned to the household. Naomi rarely spoke about her approach, but her actions made the lesson clear to anyone paying attention. She treated every challenge as something to understand rather than something to fight against. Instead of letting strict rules create conflict, she studied them carefully and adjusted her work until those rules became easier to follow. Her patience allowed her to remain steady even when the environment felt demanding. Over time, the staff realized that the reputation of the mansion had begun to change as well. Employment agencies that once struggled to keep workers in the position now heard that the cleaning job had finally stabilized. The stories about maids leaving every few days slowly faded as people learned that someone had managed to stay. Those who visited the mansion noticed that the house still looked just as luxurious as before, with shining floors, spotless glass, and carefully arranged decorations. What they couldn't see immediately was the quiet shift that had taken place behind the scenes. The tension that once drove workers away had been replaced by a calmer rhythm built through patience, attention, and dignity. The same quiet strength Naomi carried with her every morning when she stepped through the tall iron gates and walked into the mansion ready to begin another day of work inside the billionaire's demanding household.